Alright, so as you may know, 12 clubs, including the Premier League Big Six and some of the biggest clubs around Europe like Real Madrid, Barcelona, Atletico Madrid, Juventus, a few others, have basically formed a coalition to not necessarily break away from the current structure, but in essence, that's what they're planning to do. They're going to form a super league that basically allows them to control their own money, to make their own rules, to govern themselves, to function outside of the current systems that have existed for over 100 years. And while I obviously am very against the idea of the Super League, the matter of the fact is, I've always known, and I think as football fans, we've always known that at some point it was going to come, and when it did come, it was just a matter of how unbearable was it going to be, how destructive was it, because obviously I don't support the Super League, but I have to point out the hypocrisy of the Premier League and UEFA, because especially the Premier League, because when the Premier League was formed, it was essentially four clubs, if I'm not wrong: Liverpool, Tottenham, Manchester United, Everton, and Arsenal. But it was essentially a few clubs that decided to break away from the old Football League system and govern themselves and create their own rules. And in the end, they very much so succeeded in getting what they wanted. They were able to generate more revenue in collaboration with Sky Sports. They were able to create their own rules that they could govern themselves under. And ultimately, the Football League had to bow down to this new entity that was the Premier League. And now the Premier League artificially sits at the top of the football pyramid, and the old first division is now the championship. So essentially, I find it very ironic that the Premier League has come out condemning those six clubs, even though I do agree with the overall sentiment. But the Premier League would not exist if they essentially had not done the exact same thing about 30 years ago and ultimately held the rest of the teams and the competition at gunpoint and gotten their way and gotten away with it. And likewise, the Champions League ultimately precipitated the idea of a European Super League, because once upon a time, when it was still the European Cup, you actually had to win your league to qualify. It was a pure meritocracy. And with the decision to essentially allow teams that finished as runners-up, and then that finished third, and then that finished fourth, and then most recently to allow teams that finished as low as fourth in the top four leagues to directly enter the group stage. And with the new proposals that, pending how far the European Super League goes, UEFA intends to make it such that even teams that haven't been in the Champions League in recent years and haven't qualified based on merit in the previous season can still qualify for the Champions League. All of these decisions, all of these implementations have led up to the European Super League, because they've allowed teams that felt bigger than the teams that make up the competitions they gladly participate in to basically behave as though they're higher than those teams, than the very essence that makes those teams elite, so to speak. You can't have Real Madrid considered a big club without beating and participating and partaking against so-called bigger clubs. The Super League will ultimately result in the same fate that the Champions League has resulted in. There will be a lower caste, which I presume will be clubs like AC Milan, Tottenham, Arsenal, maybe even Liverpool, that will basically be making up the numbers, and there'll be a few clubs that will dominate and take control of everything. So ultimately, it's very sad, it's very disheartening that it's come to this point, but we have to follow the trail, the footsteps that have led up to this point. And ultimately, the Premier League and UEFA, with the expansion of the Champions League, have led us to this point. And I'm afraid to say that we're probably at a point of no return. We'll probably look at the football that has taken place over the last 60, 70 years as the old era, before football was truly football. With things like Champions League trophies, league titles, they're going to become irrelevant over time. It's just the natural way of things. And even though I think that FIFA and UEFA's supposed decision to ban players who seek to participate in the Super League from participating in their competitions may be effective, it's ultimately going to lead to UEFA and FIFA bowing down essentially to the Super League, because while that may be effective in the event that those players get spooked, so to speak, the same clubs that have formed the Super League could go ahead and form their own coalition, their own new football association that essentially organizes the World Cup, but in a different way, that simply allows the same players that are participating in the Super League to compete, plus the players that aren't officially barred, and in essence circumvent any sort of measures that UEFA and FIFA could implement to stop this whole thing from going ahead. So yeah, those are just my thoughts. I think it's very sad, very upsetting as a football fan, but this day has been coming, and I think the best thing that football fans can do is show discontent, to show that they're not in favor of this over commercialization of football. It's already been commercialized, but this is taking it to a whole new extreme, and it could ultimately lead to the death of football as we know it.